Monster Hunter World is a very complex game that can definitely be very overwhelming, especially for a newcomer to the series, or someone that is simply not very well versed into a lot of action RPGs. What's more, there are a lot of settings, a lot of things that you might not even know about, some of which I didn't even know of until hundreds of hours into the game, and so with us seeing a lot of new players getting back into Monster Hunter World, some for the very first time, I figured I should make a video covering some of these settings and tips that I think are going to make the overall gameplay experience for Monster Hunter World not only better but also a lot more enjoyable for you guys, because let's be honest, there are quite a few things in the game that could be just a little bit better. And so with that being said, hello everyone, my name is Dark Hero and let's begin. So the very first setting that I have for you guys is regarding the game's lock-on system, because it may seem somewhat unintuitive or just problematic and may make your experience worse. This is the default lock-on camera. As you can see right here, the camera locks onto the monster and it makes sure that it keeps track of it. However, during combat this may actually feel somewhat problematic, as you really need to pay attention to your surroundings, especially when you are fighting multiple monsters at the same time. And if for whatever reason you just happen to tilt your analog stick, you can easily remove the lock-on from the monster, and so again I really don't think it's all that good. So in my opinion, one of the very most important settings is to go into the second page of the camera settings, go into camera style and change from focus camera into target camera. So by doing this, whenever I lock onto the monster, which you can see right there on the bottom left corner of the screen, the camera is actually not tied to the monster. I can freely move it around as much as I want. However, whenever I press the L1 button, the camera snaps back to the monster immediately, so I can very easily get a grasp of my surroundings, and then with a single press of a button, I can see everything that I need to see. Because Monster Hunter is such a fast-paced game, especially World compared to previous titles, it's very important that you keep track of everything that is happening, especially in the endgame hunts, where a lot of things can one-shot you. So unless you really like using the focus camera, maybe you're used to it by playing games like Dark Souls or Elden Ring, then I would really recommend you guys to swap from the focus camera to the target camera. Also, while we are here, another very important setting is making sure that you disable the option to lock on to small monsters, because, let's be frank, once you are past the very early portions of the game, there's really no point to doing this, and it's just going to make things a little bit worse for you whenever you want to lock on to a large monster. So the way you do this is by going into the options. Once again we go back to the camera settings, and in the second page you will find target settings, at which point you can select large monsters only. And as you can see, I cannot lock on to any of these small monsters, so the bar knows don't take up space whenever I want to lock on to one of the large monsters. You might be wondering what the hell am I doing below a Bombaro, but a very important thing about Monster Hunter World is that a lot of the monsters you'll be facing later on especially are going to be very large, and so it can be very difficult to keep track of your position of your hunter relative to that of the monster and see what exactly you're doing at all situations. As you can see right here, it's kinda hard to see what's happening, so just picture this if we were to fight Bombaro right now. And as you can see right here, the exact same thing happens with Kushala, and he's not even that big of an elder dragon. However, you can easily change this to make it much better for you by simply going into the game settings, scrolling down to player silhouette display, and from here you have three different options, those being faint, which lets you see your silhouette like this, normal, which is a bit brighter, and finally distinct, which is a lot brighter. I know some people dislike this because it can make the game less immersive, but personally when you're trying to line up some moves and you can't really see what's going on, especially with weapons like the greatsword, I think it's a lot easier to keep track of what's going on. So again, I really do believe that this is a very important setting that is going to make things a lot better for you on pretty much every single hunt you do. Alright, now the next setting is something that is actually on by default and it actually harms your gameplay experience. I think it makes it a lot worse. So thank Capcom for at least letting us change that, but what I'm talking about is your weapon sheathing. So by default the game will make it so that if you don't use your weapon for a little while, it will actually automatically sheath it. Just like that. Now the reason why this can be harmful is that depending on the weapon you're using, it can actually take quite a long time for you to sheath your weapon. Some of the bigger and slower weapons like the greatsword usually take a long time to do so, and doing that in the middle of combat, especially when it's something that you don't intentionally want to do, can lead to a lot of dangerous situations where the game ends up making you sheath your weapon, making it so that you are locked onto the animation and so you can't dodge something and you get hit by an attack. So please do yourself a favor, go down to the controls options and here in the sheath settings change it to manual sheath so that it never happens to you and you yourself are the one that decides when it is best to sheath your weapon. One of the new features introduced in Monster Hunter World that a lot of players, especially the newer ones, really do appreciate. The setting I'm talking about is also here within the controls page, and it is the radial menu settings. By default you are on type 1, which makes it so that whenever you have your radial menu open, whenever you flick your analog to one of these buttons, it will immediately use it. Now personally I don't like this a lot because when you are out in the middle of a hunt and you are trying to very quickly get to one item, you may not have the perfect accuracy to flick the analog stick into the right direction of what you want to do. So if for example I'm in a pickle, I'm at low HP and I'm trying to consume a max potion and I accidentally tilt the analog stick up, it ends up using the whetstone instead of the max potion. And so what the radial menu type 2 allows you to do is, it lets you freely explore your radial menu. As you can see right here, I'm basically spinning my right trigger, I'm basically spinning my analog stick and nothing is happening. With this setting, for me to use the radial menu, I have to select one of these items and then press the R3 button, which I think makes it a lot more comfortable to use. It's still very fast and snappy, but it allows you to be much more precise with your radial menu, which I think is a much better trade-off. Now the next setting is one that, in my opinion, can be deceptively very important. And it is, quite simply, to go into the camera settings, go into the third page and adjust your camera distance. By default, the camera looks something like this. It's not too bad, but again, because in Monster Hunter World you want to see as much of the game as possible, you want to gather as much information as you can, and keep track of everything that is happening at the same time. So one way that we can do that very easily is to simply maximize our view distance by increasing the camera distance too far. Again, the difference isn't huge, it's a couple of steps, maybe 3 steps at most, but it can make the difference in some situations, and I think it's just a nice quality of life change that you can make for yourself, and it's hidden here in the options menu. Now this one is somewhat niche and even controversial, I would say, but I think that it is very important, especially for some weapons, and so if you want to make the most out of them, it may just be what you need. I'm talking about the directional control type. By default, the game makes it so that whenever you're trying to land an attack that allows you to aim it, for example when you're trying to charge a greatsword slash, as you can see right here, I can use my left analog stick to kind of tilt my hunter into a different direction to make sure that it lines up with what I'm trying to hit. So for example, if I'm positioned like this and I'm trying to hit the pillar, I can still rotate it around and make sure that it actually connects. That being said, with type 1 it makes it so that the character's movement by you using the analog stick is going to accompany the direction of the camera. So if I push my analog stick forward, it's always going to be moving away from the camera, and if I push it backwards, it's going to be moving closer to the camera. That being said, with some specific weapons like the sword and shield for example, the directional inputs can actually be something that is very important, especially when you're running around a monster for example and you're trying to do a very quick back hop. You may prefer to have the camera direction be somewhat different. And so by changing it to type 2, it makes it so that the direction your character is going to move is going to depend solely on the direction your character is facing, giving you a lot more freedom of movement, in my opinion. So type 2 allows me to do things like this, where I'm trying to go for a back hop and I can very easily change the camera direction, so that, let's say we pretend the pillar is a monster and I want to run past it and really quickly do a back hop, then that is something that I can only do with type 2, or at least it's a lot easier for me in my personal experience. Again, this is somewhat of a controversial change, and it certainly doesn't affect all different weapons, but if you're trying to improve yourself as a hunter, I think that this is one of the tools that you should keep in mind, as it gives you more freedom of movement and overall control over your character. Now the next setting is one that I don't think a lot of people do appreciate, but I think that it is a nice quality of life improvement, and to find it you have to go right here into the display settings, and it's to basically just turn off the screen vibration. There are a lot of very large monsters that can cause tremors and the screen to shake a lot, especially once you get into the endgame and you start facing the Devil Joes and the Ruiner Nergigantes and whatnot. And again, this isn't anything major, but I think that it is a nice quality of life change that you can make very easily. Now the next setting that I recommend you guys use is actually a pretty simple one. So if you look at the top right corner of the screen, unless I hold the L1 button, you can't really see my health bar or stamina. As you can see, since I'm out of combat, my stamina bar doesn't even show up, but it is blinking to indicate that it is currently being depleted. However, if I were to attack, let's say, this small innocent creature, as you can see I took some damage and so my health bar shows up. But if I attack Devil Joe here and we start combat, as you can see now my stamina bar and health bar are both showing despite being completely full. This is quite simply an aesthetic choice, but if it's a setting that you would like to turn on, then all you need to do is go into the game settings, and down here in health and stamina gauge settings, you simply change from fixed, which is the default, to dynamic. And since we're talking about the HUD, I should also mention that by going here into the HUD display, you can opt to turn on and off a bunch of these different display settings. Like as you can see right here, I have the partner info off, as well as the button guide and the objectives. And of course, if you're using a weapon that you don't know how to properly use, the button guide might be helpful. If you're playing in multiplayer, you definitely want to have the partner info on, so you know when to use a life dust, for example, to heal your teammates. And the quest objectives are often very simple, it's something that you don't really need to check. But again, this is all up to personal preference. It's something that Monster Hunter Rise actually did better in my opinion, because they let you target even smaller things. Like for example, within the player information, I could remove things like the timer and the player name, which would just make the HUD a little bit cleaner. Now I'm sure that many of you guys before have been in this situation where you are in the middle of the quest and someone just happens to join. However, there is one thing that you can do to make sure that that never happens without you letting it happen. And for that, all you need to do is to go down here in the game settings into quest join settings and change from auto accept to manual accept. That way, if someone tries to join your quest while you are in the middle of it, you will get a pop-up notification on the right side of the screen, just like that one that has just shown up. And so you open up the menu and go here into the quest tab, and you'll be able to accept any join requests in here. So this is particularly useful for all those players that complain about people joining their quests only then to cart and be useless. Now one other setting that I think can be especially useful to those that are playing on PC with a controller, especially a PlayStation controller, is to make it so that the buttons actually display with a PlayStation controller input. And for this you actually need to back out of the game, go into the options here, select interface, and here where it says gamepad button icon selection, as you can see you swap to type 2 and you get the PlayStation button prompts, whereas type 1 you get the Xbox button prompts. These are, in my opinion, the most important settings and things that you can tweak to make the gameplay experience in Monster Hunter World a lot better for you. Let me know if there's anything that I've missed, and be on the lookout for more guides and tips videos. With that being said, my name is Dark Hero, thank you very much for watching, and as always, happy hunting!